Sometimes the loneliest seat in the ballroom is the one surrounded by hundreds of people. Claire Bennett tightened her fingers around the stem of her champagne glass as laughter echoed beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Grand Windsor Hotel. The wedding reception sparkled with gold light and soft violin music, every table overflowing with expensive floral arrangements and smiling couples dressed like they belonged inside a magazine. And then there was Claire, sitting alone at table 19 near the back corner of the ballroom, trying not to notice the sympathetic glances drifting her way every few minutes. Beside her, 5-year-old Lily rested sleepily against her shoulder in a pale blue dress that Claire had spent 3 nights altering by hand because buying a new one simply wasn't possible this month. "Mommy," Lily whispered softly, her tiny fingers curling around Claire's arm. "Can we go home after cake?" Claire forced a smile and brushed a loose blonde curl away from her daughter's forehead. "Soon, sweetheart." The truth was, she had wanted to leave almost the moment she arrived. Weddings had become exhausting ever since the divorce. Every slow dance felt like a reminder. Every smiling couple felt like proof that maybe love worked for everyone except her. Across the ballroom, the bride laughed as guests gathered near the dance floor, champagne glasses raised high beneath the glittering lights. Claire recognized almost nobody except her cousin Amanda and a few distant relatives she only saw once every few years. The rest of the room belonged to another world entirely. Tailored tuxedos, diamond bracelets, luxury watches that probably cost more than her car. Claire glanced down at her own dark green dress, suddenly aware of every wrinkle she had tried to smooth out in the hotel restroom earlier. She hated feeling invisible, but somehow tonight felt even worse than invisible. Tonight she felt judged. She came alone again. The whisper floated from the nearby table, just quietly enough to pretend it wasn't meant for her. Claire stared down into her champagne, pretending not to hear. "I heard the husband left years ago. Poor thing. At least she still has." The little girl. Heat crawled up Claire's neck. She shifted Lily gently higher against her shoulder and inhaled slowly, fighting the sting behind her eyes. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry tonight. Not here. Not in front of strangers who already looked at her like some tragic story they could gossip about over dessert. The orchestra began another romantic song as couples drifted toward the dance floor. Claire watched them for a moment before quickly looking away. It wasn't jealousy exactly. It was exhaustion. Exhaustion from always being the woman people pitied. The single mom. The one abandoned while pregnant. The cautionary tale everyone quietly discussed once enough wine had been poured. Lily suddenly sat upright. "Mommy," she whispered excitedly, pointing toward the ballroom entrance. "Who's that?" A subtle shift moved through the room almost instantly. Conversations softened. Heads turned. Even the waitstaff seemed more alert as a tall man stepped inside the ballroom, wearing a perfectly tailored black tuxedo that looked effortlessly expensive. Claire recognized him immediately despite only seeing him a handful of times in magazines and local business interviews. Ethan Calloway, billionaire investor, owner of half the luxury developments downtown. Amanda had mentioned he was friends with the groom from college, but Claire never imagined someone like him would actually attend. He carried himself with the kind of calm confidence money couldn't buy overnight. Dark hair, sharp jawline, cold gray eyes that scanned the ballroom like he already understood every person in it within seconds. Women near the front tables visibly straightened in their seats as he passed. Claire quickly looked away before their eyes could accidentally meet. Men like Ethan Calloway existed in a completely different universe from women like her. But a few seconds later, Lily whispered again. "Mommy, I think he's looking at you." Claire frowned softly and glanced up before she could stop herself. And for one brief, impossible moment, Ethan Calloway's eyes locked directly onto hers from across the ballroom. Not casually, not politely, intentionally. Claire's breath caught. Unexpectedly. Then Lily shifted too quickly beside her, accidentally knocking her small cup of cranberry juice off the table. Red liquid splashed across the white tablecloth and dripped onto the polished marble floor. Several nearby guests immediately turned toward them. Claire's stomach dropped. "Oh my God, Lily," she whispered, grabbing napkins frantically as embarrassment crashed over her all at once. "I'm sorry," Lily said quietly, her little lip trembling. Claire knelt beside her daughter, trying to clean the spill fast enough before anyone complained. But then a calm male voice spoke directly behind her. Looks like this table needed a little color anyway. Claire froze completely as an expensive white handkerchief appeared beside the spilled juice. Claire slowly looked up from the spilled cranberry juice, her pulse suddenly uneven as Ethan Calloway crouched beside the table without the slightest hesitation. The white handkerchief still extended calmly in his hand, like helping embarrassed strangers at luxury weddings was part of his normal evening routine. Up close, he looked even more intimidating than he had across the ballroom. His tuxedo fit perfectly, his expensive watch catching the chandelier light as guests nearby openly stared at the bizarre sight of one of the wealthiest men in Manhattan kneeling beside a single mother cleaning juice off the floor. It was an accident, Ethan said quietly before Claire could apologize again. His voice was smooth, low, controlled. The kind of voice that instantly made people listen. Lily peeked shyly from behind Claire's shoulder, clutching the edge of her tiny cardigan. "I am sorry," she whispered softly. Ethan's serious expression softened almost immediately as he turned toward her instead of the surrounding guests. "That makes two of us," he said. "I spilled an entire glass of champagne on a senator once." Lily blinked in surprise. "Really? Completely ruined his shoes." A tiny laugh escaped Lily before she could stop it, and Claire felt some of the crushing humiliation loosen from her chest. Ethan handed Claire the handkerchief while nearby waiters rushed over with towels. "Thank you," Claire said quietly, still trying to understand why he had stopped at their table at all. "You do not have to, I know," he interrupted gently. "But your daughter looked like she was about to blame herself for the entire wedding." Lily looked down guiltily at her little shoes. Ethan tilted his head slightly toward her. "Trust me, kid. Weddings survive worse things than juice." Claire noticed several women at nearby tables watching them openly now, whispering behind champagne glasses. She immediately recognized the look in their eyes. Curiosity, speculation, judgment. She had spent years learning how quickly people created stories about women sitting alone. Ethan stood smoothly to his full height and offered Lily a folded napkin with surprising patience. "Emergency cleanup equipment," he said seriously. Lily accepted it like it was something important. "Thank you, Mr. Ethan," he corrected gently. "Most people only call me Mr. when they want money." Lily giggled again. Claire could not remember the last time a stranger had made her daughter smile that quickly. "You are very good with children," Claire admitted softly as she rose from her chair. Ethan glanced briefly toward Lily before answering. "Children usually tell the truth. That makes them easier to talk to than adults." Something about the answer caught Claire off guard. There was no arrogance in it. No rehearsed charm. Just quiet honesty. The orchestra shifted into another slow song while guests filled the dance floor again. Around them, conversations slowly resumed, though Claire could still feel curious eyes drifting back toward their table every few seconds. Ethan seemed completely unaffected by the attention. "You are Amanda's cousin, right?" he asked calmly. Claire nodded. "Claire Bennett. Ethan Calloway." "I know." One corner of his mouth lifted slightly, not quite a smile. That usually makes introductions easier. Claire surprised herself by smiling back just a little. It had been a long time since someone made her forget to feel self-conscious, even for a few seconds. Lily suddenly tugged on Claire's sleeve. "Mommy, I need the bathroom." Claire blinked, pulled back into reality. "Of course, sweetheart." She turned toward Ethan awkwardly. "Thank you again for helping us." But before she could guide Lily away, one of Amanda's bridesmaids approached the table wearing an uncomfortable expression. "Claire," she said quietly, "there is actually a small seating issue." Claire's stomach tightened immediately. Of course there was. What kind of issue? The bridesmaid lowered her voice. "The wedding planner accidentally needs this table for additional guests from the groom's side. They are running out of room near the front." Claire felt heat rush to her face again. "Oh." The bridesmaid offered an apologetic smile that did not feel apologetic at all. "I am so sorry. Maybe you and Lily could sit near the bar area temporarily." Temporarily. Claire knew exactly what that meant. Hidden away. Out of sight. She nodded quickly before the embarrassment could fully reach her expression. "That is fine." Lily looked confused as Claire gathered her purse and wrapped one arm protectively around her daughter. Around them, conversations softened again as people pretended not to watch. Claire swallowed hard. She should have stayed home tonight. She should never have believed she still belonged at events like this. But just as she turned to leave, Ethan's voice cut smoothly through the awkward silence. "Actually," he said calmly, reaching for the empty chair beside him. "This seat is already taken." Claire froze. The bridesmaid blinked. "Excuse me." Ethan looked directly at Claire now, his gray eyes unreadable beneath the ballroom lights. Then, with the faintest hint of something dangerous hidden behind his calm expression, he said, "She is sitting with me." For a second, the entire table went silent except for the soft violin music drifting through the ballroom. Claire stood frozen beside her chair, still holding Lily's tiny hand as the bridesmaid stared at Ethan Calloway in visible confusion. "I did not realize you were seated together," the woman said carefully. Ethan's expression remained calm. "Now you do." There was nothing rude in his voice, yet somehow nobody questioned him after that. The bridesmaid forced an awkward smile before stepping away quickly, disappearing back into the crowd of guests near the dance floor. Claire could still feel eyes watching her from nearby tables. Only minutes ago, those same people had looked at her with pity. Now they looked confused instead, which somehow felt even more overwhelming. "You really did not have to do that," Claire said quietly once the bridesmaid was gone. Ethan pulled out the empty chair beside him with effortless ease. "I know," he replied again. "You say that a lot." Claire hesitated. Men like Ethan did not casually invite struggling single mothers to sit beside them at luxury weddings. Nothing about this situation made sense. But Lily looked up at her hopefully, clearly more fascinated than nervous now. Claire finally sat down slowly, smoothing her dress beneath the table as Ethan returned to his seat beside her. The shift in atmosphere was immediate. Servers suddenly appeared, offering fresh champagne. Guests nearby smiled more politely now. Even the older couple at the next table who had ignored Claire earlier suddenly nodded at her warmly. Claire hated how quickly people changed once power entered the room. Lily climbed into her chair and whispered loudly enough for Ethan to hear. "Mommy, I think he is famous." Claire nearly choked on her champagne. Ethan surprised her by laughing softly under his breath. "That depends who you ask." Lily studied him carefully with the brutal honesty only children possessed. "You look expensive." Ethan leaned back slightly, clearly trying not to laugh harder. "Lily," Claire whispered in horror. "What?" Lily asked innocently. "Grandma says expensive people always wear shiny shoes." Ethan glanced down at his polished black dress shoes. "Your grandmother sounds very observant." Lily smiled proudly. Claire covered her face briefly with one hand. "I am so sorry." "Please do not apologize," Ethan said. "Most adults spend entire conversations pretending to be impressive." Your daughter skipped directly to the truth. Lily looked very pleased with herself. Claire could not remember the last time she had relaxed this much around someone new. It felt dangerous somehow. Comfortable. The orchestra music softened as waiters began serving dinner around the ballroom. Crystal glasses clinked beneath the golden lights while conversations swelled again across the room. Ethan casually reached for the children's menu beside Lily's plate. "What are we thinking tonight?" he asked her seriously. "Chicken tenders or life-changing wedding pasta?" Lily gasped softly. "There is life-changing pasta? That is what rich people call noodles with expensive sauce." Claire laughed before she could stop herself. A real laugh this time, not the polite fake version she used at work or family gatherings. Ethan glanced toward her briefly, and for a moment something unreadable passed through his gray eyes. Not flirtation exactly, more like quiet surprise. Like he had not expected her smile to change her entire face. Claire quickly looked away first. "Dangerous. Definitely dangerous." "I want the pasta," Lily announced confidently. "Excellent choice," Ethan said solemnly. "Very sophisticated." As Lily colored on the paper menu with crayons from her little purse, Claire noticed several women near the front tables continuing to glance their direction. One blonde woman in a silver dress openly frowned every time Ethan spoke to Claire. "You are making half the room uncomfortable," Claire said softly under her breath. Ethan barely looked up from pouring water into Lily's cup. "That sounds like their problem." Claire shook her head slightly. "You are very used to getting your way, are you?" "Usually. And if someone tells you no?" Ethan finally looked at her fully then, his expression calm but sharp enough to make her pulse stumble unexpectedly. "That depends who is saying it." Before Claire could respond, Lily suddenly tugged on Ethan's sleeve. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." Lily lowered her voice dramatically. "Are you a prince?" Claire nearly dropped her fork. Ethan stared at Lily for one long second before answering with complete seriousness. "Unfortunately, no. New York has very strict prince regulations." Lily frowned thoughtfully. Then maybe you are Batman. Ethan nodded slowly. That one I cannot confirm or deny. Lily burst into giggles loud enough that nearby guests turned again. Claire watched Ethan carefully as he smiled at her daughter. And something inside her chest tightened unexpectedly. Most men avoided children at events like this. Especially powerful men. Especially wealthy men with entire rooms fighting for their attention. But Ethan listened to Lily like nothing else in the ballroom mattered. And somehow that frightened Claire more than his money ever could. Because for the first time in years, she caught herself wondering what it would feel like if someone chose to stay instead of leave. Then Ethan leaned slightly closer toward Lily and asked quietly, "So tell me honestly, was your mom really planning to leave before dessert?" Lily nodded immediately. She does that when sad people stare at us. Claire's stomach dropped. Ethan's expression changed almost invisibly as his eyes lifted slowly toward her. Softer now, more careful, and somehow that look hurt far more than pity ever could. Claire looked down at her wine glass, suddenly unable to answer. The warmth she had started feeling only seconds earlier faded beneath the familiar ache she worked so hard to hide from people. Sad people stare at us. Children always told the truth. Ethan remained quiet beside her, but she could feel him watching carefully now, no longer with curiosity alone. There was understanding in his expression, and somehow that felt far more dangerous. Claire forced a small smile for Lily and brushed her fingers gently through her daughter's soft blonde curls. "Sweetheart, that is enough questions for one night." "But I am right," Lily whispered innocently. Claire opened her mouth to redirect the conversation when a tall woman in a silver designer gown suddenly approached their table, holding a champagne flute between perfectly manicured fingers. Her smile was polished but cold around the edges. "Ethan," she said smoothly. "There you are. We were beginning to think you escaped." Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair, his expression immediately unreadable again. Vanessa. Claire instantly recognized the type of woman standing in front of them. Wealthy, elegant, beautiful in the careful, expensive way magazine covers loved. Vanessa's gaze shifted toward Claire for less than a second before returning to Ethan. "Your mother has been asking for you," she continued. "The Harringtons want introductions before dessert." Ethan's tone remained calm. "Then they can wait 5 minutes." Vanessa's eyes flicked toward Lily this time, then toward Claire's simple green dress. The smile on her face tightened almost invisibly. "I did not realize you brought guests tonight." Claire immediately straightened in her chair. "Oh, I am not. Claire and Lily are sitting with me." Ethan interrupted before she could finish. Vanessa blinked once, clearly caught off guard. "I see." But the way she said it made Claire feel exactly how much she did not belong there. Lily leaned closer to Claire and whispered far too loudly, "She looks angry." Ethan lowered his head briefly, like he was hiding amusement. Vanessa forced another smile. "Well, enjoy your evening." She turned gracefully and disappeared back toward the ballroom crowd. Claire exhaled slowly the second she left. "I think your friend hates me." "Vanessa does not hate you," Ethan replied calmly. "Vanessa hates surprises." "Same thing." Ethan almost smiled again, but his attention shifted briefly across the ballroom toward a cluster of older guests watching their table openly now. Claire noticed it too. Every minute she stayed beside him seemed to attract more attention. More whispers. More speculation. "You really should go back to your people," Claire said quietly. "Your people," Ethan repeated softly. "That sounds very official." "You know what I mean." "Do I?" Claire finally looked directly at him again. "Ethan, this is your world, not mine." For the first time since sitting beside her, his expression changed completely. Less distant now, more focused. "And what exactly makes you think you do not belong here?" Claire gave a quiet laugh without humor. "Maybe because your friends look at me like I accidentally wandered in from the parking lot." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "That says more about them than you. You do not understand." "Then explain it to me." Claire hesitated. Nobody ever asked that question sincerely anymore. Most people preferred assumptions. Single mother. Failed marriage. Financial struggles. End of story. I spent 3 years learning how uncomfortable people become around women like me, she admitted softly. Especially at events like this. Ethan remained silent, listening. "Everyone loves happy couples," Claire continued. "Nobody knows what to do with the woman sitting alone." The orchestra music swelled again as another dance began beneath the chandeliers. Couples drifted toward the ballroom floor, while laughter echoed across the room. Claire suddenly became painfully aware that she had not danced with anyone in years. Ethan followed her gaze toward the dance floor. You used to like weddings. It was not phrased like a question. Claire frowned slightly. How would you know that? Ethan's eyes returned to hers, steady and unreadable. You smiled when the bride walked in earlier. Not politely. Honestly. Claire stared at him for a moment, caught off guard by the observation. Nobody noticed details like that anymore. Not about her. Before she could answer, Lily suddenly climbed halfway into Ethan's lap to look toward the enormous wedding cake near the dance floor. Mommy, she gasped dramatically. Look at the flowers. Claire immediately reached for her daughter. Lily, honey, do not climb on people. It is okay, Ethan said quietly before Claire could pull her back. He steadied Lily carefully with one arm while she stared at the cake in amazement. The movement looked strangely natural, and Claire felt something inside her chest tighten unexpectedly again. Ethan glanced down at Lily, then back toward Claire. You know, he said softly, most people spend entire evenings here pretending to be someone else. Claire blinked. What does that mean? Ethan leaned slightly closer then, close enough that only she could hear him beneath the music and conversation surrounding them. It means, he said quietly, you are probably the most honest person in this ballroom. Claire's breath caught before she could stop it, and then Ethan's gaze lowered briefly toward her hand resting nervously beside her wine glass before lifting back to her eyes again. Do you trust me for 5 minutes? He asked softly. Claire stared at him for a moment, completely unsure how to answer. Nobody had asked for her trust in a very long time. Not sincerely, not gently. The ballroom lights shimmered across Ethan's gray eyes as he waited without pressure, calm and impossibly patient beside her. Around them, conversations blurred into soft background noise while couples continued moving slowly across the dance floor. Claire became suddenly aware of how close he was sitting now. Close enough that his voice felt private beneath the orchestra music. Close enough that she could smell the faint, clean scent of cedar and expensive cologne. Dangerous, she reminded herself again. Very dangerous. 5 minutes for what? She asked carefully. One corner of Ethan's mouth lifted slightly. To stop looking like you were preparing an escape route. Claire almost smiled despite herself. And if I say no? Then I will sit here politely and continue discussing life-changing pasta with your daughter. Lily immediately looked up from her dessert spoon. The pasta was very good. Ethan nodded seriously. A strong review. Claire shook her head softly, but before she could answer, movement near the ballroom entrance drew attention across the room again. Another wave of guests had arrived late to the reception, filling empty spaces near the dance floor. The music swelled louder as photographers moved through the crowd taking pictures beneath the enormous crystal chandeliers. Ethan glanced toward the center of the ballroom, then back at Claire. Come with me. Claire blinked. What? Ethan stood smoothly beside the table and extended his hand toward her like this was the most natural thing in the world. One dance. Every instinct inside Claire immediately screamed no. Absolutely not. Men like Ethan Calloway did not dance with women like her in front of rooms full of wealthy strangers. This was exactly the kind of moment people whispered about afterward. But then Lily looked between them with huge hopeful eyes. Mommy, she whispered dramatically, you have to. This is like the movies. Claire nearly laughed from pure nerves. Sweetheart, please? Lily begged quietly. Ethan remained standing there patiently, not arrogant, not demanding, just waiting. And somehow that made it harder to refuse. Claire finally placed her trembling hand into his. The moment his fingers closed gently around hers, the entire ballroom seemed to shift around them. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough that she immediately noticed conversations slowing nearby as guests openly watched Ethan guide her toward the dance floor. Claire's pulse hammered beneath her ribs. This is a terrible idea, she whispered under her breath as they stepped onto the polished marble floor. Probably, Ethan agreed calmly. But it is still happening. Claire let out a nervous breath that almost sounded like laughter. The orchestra played a slow romantic melody while Ethan rested one hand lightly against her waist, careful and respectful, giving her plenty of space to pull away if she wanted. But Claire did not pull away. That frightened her more than anything. She could feel dozens of eyes following them now. The whispers had changed completely. No longer pity. No longer dismissal. Confusion. Curiosity. Shock. Ethan looked entirely unaffected by it all. Relax your shoulders, he murmured softly. Claire frowned up at him. You noticed that? You tense up every time someone looks at you. The honesty of the observation caught her off guard again. Ethan gently guided her through the slow rhythm of the music with effortless confidence. You dance very well, Claire admitted quietly after a moment. Boarding school survival skill. That sounds expensive. It was emotionally exhausting. Claire laughed softly before she could stop herself again. Ethan looked down at her briefly, and this time the warmth in his expression lingered a little longer. There it is, he said quietly. What? That smile. Claire's heartbeat stumbled unexpectedly. She looked away first, focusing instead on the sparkling lights above them. It had been years since someone looked at her like she was still worth noticing. Years since anyone made her feel feminine instead of simply tired. Ethan leaned slightly closer, so only she could hear him beneath the music. You know what I think? Claire swallowed carefully. What? I think you spent so long trying not to inconvenience anyone that eventually people forgot to take care of you too. The words hit far too hard. Claire's eyes immediately burned with emotion she refused to let surface tonight. Not here. Ethan noticed the shift instantly. His hand against her waist softened slightly. I am sorry, he said quietly. I did not mean to upset you. You did not. Claire forced herself to breathe steadily. It is just, she stopped herself before saying too much. Ethan waited anyway. Patient again. Gentle again. Dangerous again. Before Claire could decide whether to continue, a familiar male voice suddenly cut sharply across the edge of the dance floor. Claire. Her entire body stiffened instantly before she even turned around. Ethan felt it too. Claire slowly looked over Ethan's shoulder and felt her stomach drop as Ryan Mercer stood only a few feet away beside a tall brunette woman in a gold cocktail dress. Ryan stared openly between Claire and Ethan with visible disbelief. Then his eyes narrowed slightly. Well, he said slowly, this is unexpected. Claire's breath caught painfully in her throat as Ryan Mercer stared at her from the edge of the dance floor with open disbelief. Beside him, the brunette woman looped perfectly manicured fingers around his arm while silently studying Claire from head to toe. The orchestra music continued around them, soft and elegant beneath the chandeliers. But suddenly Claire could hear nothing except the rushing sound of old memories she had spent years trying to bury. Ethan felt the change in her immediately. His hand against her waist remained steady, grounding, calm, protective. Ryan let out a short laugh that carried just enough arrogance to make Claire's stomach twist. Wow, he said slowly. I leave for one drink, and suddenly you are dancing with Ethan Calloway. Claire instinctively stepped back slightly, but Ethan's hand remained gently supportive at her waist, not possessive, simply there. Ryan's gaze shifted toward Ethan with visible calculation now. Small world. Ethan's expression did not change. Apparently. The brunette beside Ryan smiled thinly. Ryan did not tell me his ex-wife would be here tonight. Claire stiffened instantly. Ex-wife. The title still sounded strange. Every time someone said it out loud. Ryan shrugged casually, like discussing failed marriages in crowded ballrooms was perfectly normal. Claire prefers to avoid social events these days. Ethan's eyes shifted briefly toward Claire before returning to Ryan again. That seems difficult to believe. Ryan laughed softly. Trust me. She disappears the second things get uncomfortable. The words landed harder than they should have. Because once upon a time, Ryan knew exactly how to hurt her without raising his voice. Claire swallowed carefully. Ryan, this is not the time. Relax, he replied lightly. I am just surprised. His gaze drifted slowly between Claire and Ethan again. I did not realize you knew each other. Before Claire could answer, Ethan spoke calmly beside her. We do now. Something in the simple sentence shifted the atmosphere instantly. Ryan noticed it too. Claire saw the subtle tightening in his jaw before he forced another easy smile. Right. The brunette woman glanced toward Ethan with obvious interest. I have seen your interviews on television, she said smoothly. Victoria Hale. Ethan nodded politely. Victoria. Claire hated how small she suddenly felt standing there. This was exactly why she avoided events like this. Because eventually someone from the past always appeared to remind her who she used to be before exhaustion and heartbreak hollowed everything out. Ryan took another sip of champagne while looking directly at Claire again. Lily here too. Claire's body immediately tightened. Ethan noticed. Ryan noticed that Ethan noticed. She is at the table. Claire answered carefully. Good, Ryan said lightly. I figured she would need supervision if you planned on spending the night dancing. Claire stared at him in disbelief. There it was. The familiar criticism hidden beneath polite words. The same tone that once made her question every decision she made as a mother. Every moment she tried doing something for herself instead of everyone else. Ethan's expression cooled instantly beside her. That sounds unfair, he said calmly. Ryan blinked once. Excuse me. Claire has spent the entire evening taking care of her daughter. Ethan continued evenly. One dance does not suddenly make her irresponsible. Silence settled heavily around them for a moment. Ryan forced out another laugh, but this one sounded thinner. You barely know her. Ethan's gaze never left his. I know enough. Claire's pulse hammered violently now. Nobody had defended her like that in years. Not publicly. Not calmly. Not without expecting something in return afterward. Ryan studied Ethan carefully now, clearly reevaluating the entire situation. Well, he said eventually, this has definitely been interesting. Victoria touched his arm gently. The bride is looking for us. Ryan nodded distractedly, but kept his eyes on Claire another second longer. You look different tonight, he said quietly. Claire frowned slightly. What does that mean? Ryan hesitated. For the first time all evening, he looked almost uncertain. Happier, he admitted softly. The word hit Claire harder than any insult could have, because she had not realized it herself until that exact moment. Ryan's eyes shifted once more toward Ethan before he finally stepped away, with Victoria disappearing back into the crowd. Claire stood motionless beneath the ballroom lights long after they left. Ethan remained quiet beside her, patient enough not to fill the silence immediately. Finally, Claire let out a shaky breath. I forgot how exhausting he is. Ethan looked down at her carefully. Your ex-husband? Claire nodded slowly. Ryan was never cruel exactly. Just, she searched for the right word. Good at making me feel small. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. That is still cruelty. Claire looked away toward the dance floor where happy couples continued swaying beneath the chandeliers. You did not have to defend me. Yes, Ethan said quietly. I did. Claire turned back toward him, startled by the certainty in his voice. Ethan's expression softened slightly then, though his eyes remained serious. Nobody should speak to you like that. The warmth in his words settled painfully deep inside her chest. Dangerous again. Always dangerous. Before Claire could respond, a tiny voice suddenly called excitedly from nearby. Mommy! Claire turned just in time to see Lily hurrying toward them from the table, clutching a slice of wedding cake on a tiny plate. But halfway across the dance floor, Lily tripped slightly on the hem of her little dress. Claire's heart jumped in panic, but Ethan reacted instantly, stepping forward and catching Lily gently before she could fall. Lily looked up at him with wide eyes while frosting smeared across the front of his expensive black tuxedo. Claire's heart jumped as Ethan caught Lily effortlessly before she could hit the marble floor, one strong arm steadying her while the small dessert plate tilted dangerously sideways. A streak of white frosting smeared across the front of Ethan's perfectly tailored tuxedo jacket, and for one horrifying second Claire froze in pure embarrassment. Oh my God, she breathed, rushing toward them. Lily, honey, are you okay? Lily blinked up at Ethan with wide, guilty eyes while he carefully lowered her back onto her tiny shoes. I am okay, she whispered softly before staring down at the frosting on his jacket. But your clothes are not. Ethan looked down at the mess across his chest in complete silence for exactly 2 seconds. Then, to Claire's shock, he sighed dramatically. This is devastating. Lily's face fell instantly. I am really sorry. Ethan lowered his voice seriously. That was my favorite tuxedo. Claire closed her eyes briefly. Lily did not mean to. Good thing. Ethan continued calmly. I own at least 3 emotionally identical black tuxedos. Lily stared at him for half a second before realizing he was joking. A tiny relieved laugh escaped her immediately. Claire let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Ethan reached for a napkin from a nearby server and handed it to Lily instead of cleaning the frosting himself. You caused the disaster, he informed her solemnly. You are now head of cleanup operations. Lily accepted the responsibility with complete seriousness and began carefully dabbing frosting from his jacket, while Ethan remained perfectly still like a patient statue in the middle of the ballroom. Nearby guests openly watched the scene with fascination now. Claire noticed several women whispering again, though this time She could not tell whether they looked confused, jealous, or simply shocked that Ethan Calloway was allowing a 5-year-old child to ruin a tuxedo that probably cost more than Claire's monthly rent. "There," Lily announced proudly after a moment. "Mostly fixed." Ethan looked down at the faint frosting smear still visible against the black fabric. "Remarkable work." Lily smiled brightly. "Mommy says I am very artistic." Claire laughed softly despite herself. "I said creative. There is a difference." Ethan glanced toward Claire again, and something warm settled behind his eyes. "I am beginning to think there is not." The orchestra music shifted into another slower melody while guests continued drifting around the ballroom, carrying champagne and desserts beneath the golden lights. Somewhere near the stage, the bride laughed loudly as photographers gathered relatives for more pictures. But somehow Claire no longer felt invisible standing there, not with Ethan beside her. And that realization frightened her almost as much as it comforted her. "I should probably help you clean that properly," Claire said quietly, gesturing toward his jacket. Ethan glanced down again. "The tragedy may be permanent." Lily gasped dramatically. "No." Ethan lowered his voice toward her again. "Be brave during this difficult time." Lily immediately wrapped both little arms around his waist in apology. Claire froze slightly at the sight. So did Ethan. For one brief moment, his entire expression softened in a way Claire had not seen before tonight. Not billionaire polished. Not calm and controlled. Just human. Lily pulled back slightly and whispered, "You smell fancy." Ethan let out a quiet laugh under his breath. "That might be the strangest compliment I have ever received." "It means good," Lily clarified seriously. Claire shook her head, smiling helplessly now. "I promise she is usually shy around strangers." "I am not a stranger anymore," Ethan said softly. The words settled between them with surprising weight. Claire looked at him before quickly looking away again, suddenly very aware of how close they were standing now in the middle of the ballroom. Ryan's words from earlier still lingered painfully in the back of her mind. Happier. She hated that he had noticed it before she had. Ethan gently adjusted Lily's crooked little cardigan sleeve while speaking quietly to her. "Do you dance, Lily?" Lily nodded enthusiastically. "Mommy dances in the kitchen sometimes." Claire immediately covered her face with one hand. "Please stop telling him things." Ethan looked genuinely amused now. "What kind of kitchen dancing are we talking about?" "The tired kind," Claire admitted before Lily could answer for her. Ethan studied her for a second longer than necessary. "I would like to see that someday." The simple sentence hit Claire unexpectedly hard because there was no teasing in his voice. No flirtation designed to impress her. Just quiet sincerity. Dangerous again. Always dangerous. Before Claire could think of a response, Lily suddenly yawned so widely, she nearly dropped the dessert plate again. Ethan caught it smoothly this time, without even looking. "Okay," Claire said softly, brushing Lily's hair back from her sleepy face. "I think somebody is reaching her limit." "I am not tired," Lily protested immediately while leaning half asleep against Ethan's side. Ethan glanced down at her with visible amusement. "You just yawned hard enough to change weather patterns." Lily giggled sleepily before rubbing her eyes. Claire reached for her daughter, but Lily surprised both of them by lifting her arms toward Ethan instead. "Carry me?" she asked softly. The entire ballroom suddenly seemed to disappear around Claire for one impossible second. Ethan looked just as surprised as she felt. Lily almost never asked strangers to hold her, especially men. Claire opened her mouth to apologize, but Ethan had already carefully lifted Lily into his arms like it was the most natural thing in the world. Lily immediately curled against his shoulder with sleepy trust. Ethan adjusted her gently against his chest while Lily rested her head beneath his chin with a content little sigh. Then Lily mumbled quietly enough that only they could hear, "You make Mommy smile different." Claire felt her entire chest tighten at Lily's sleepy words. "You make Mommy smile different." Ethan looked down at the little girl resting against his shoulder, and for the first time all evening, he seemed completely speechless. Around them, the ballroom continued glowing beneath chandeliers and soft music, but Claire suddenly felt like the world had narrowed into this one impossible moment. Lily was half asleep now, her small fingers curled loosely against Ethan's lapel, while the remains of wedding cake frosting still marked his tuxedo. Ethan carefully adjusted her higher against his chest with natural ease, supporting her like he had done it 1,000 times before. Claire could not stop staring at the sight. It hurt in a way she had not expected, because this was the exact kind of moment she had stopped allowing herself to imagine years ago. I should take her home, Claire whispered softly after a long silence. Ethan lifted his eyes toward her again. You do not sound very convinced. Claire let out a quiet breath. I am trying to be responsible. You have been responsible all night. His voice remained calm, but there was something heavier beneath it now. Something more personal. Claire glanced around the ballroom instinctively. People were still watching them. She could feel it. Some curious, some judgmental, some openly fascinated. A billionaire holding a sleepy child while standing beside a woman who clearly did not belong in their world made the perfect story for people who had never struggled a day in their lives. Ethan seemed completely unconcerned by any of it. There is a balcony upstairs, he said quietly after a moment. It is quieter. Claire hesitated only briefly before nodding. Maybe because she suddenly needed air. Maybe because somewhere during the last 2 hours, Ethan had become the first person in years who made silence feel safe instead of awkward. He guided her carefully through the ballroom, while carrying Lily against his shoulder, his free hand resting lightly near Claire's back whenever crowded guests moved too close. Every person they passed seemed to pause mid-conversation. Claire heard whispers behind them. Ethan ignored every single one. The upstairs balcony overlooked the Manhattan skyline through enormous glass windows, glowing with thousands of city lights beyond the hotel. Soft string lights lined the quiet terrace, while distant music drifted faintly upward from the ballroom below. The moment they stepped outside, Claire inhaled deeply against the cool night air. Better? Ethan asked softly. Claire nodded. Much. Ethan moved toward one of the outdoor couches and carefully lowered himself into the corner seat without waking Lily. She immediately curled closer against him in her sleep. Claire sat beside them slowly, watching her daughter rest peacefully against a man she had met only hours ago. She does not usually trust people this quickly, Claire admitted quietly. Ethan glanced down at Lily before answering. Maybe she is smarter than most adults. Claire smiled faintly, but it faded almost immediately. Or maybe she is just tired of seeing me do everything alone. Ethan looked toward her then, really looked at her, patient and attentive in that dangerous way he always did. Claire stared out toward the city lights instead because it suddenly felt easier than holding his gaze. Ryan left 3 months after I found out I was pregnant, she admitted softly. The words surprised even her. She had not planned to say them out loud tonight. Ethan remained completely still beside her, listening again. At first he kept saying he just needed space. Claire continued quietly. Then eventually he stopped calling altogether. She laughed once without humor. I spent months convincing myself he would come back before I finally realized he was happier pretending we did not exist. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. Claire noticed it this time. I do not tell people that story anymore, she admitted. Most of them already decide what kind of woman you are the second they hear single mom. And what kind of woman is that? Ethan asked quietly. Claire shrugged lightly. Tired. Complicated. Someone men avoid once reality becomes inconvenient. Silence settled softly between them, while distant music echoed from the ballroom downstairs. Finally, Ethan spoke again, his voice lower now. I saw you before tonight. Claire turned toward him immediately, confused. What? Ethan's gray eyes held hers, steadily beneath the soft balcony lights. 2 years ago. Bellevue Hospital. Claire blinked in surprise. I do not understand. Ethan glanced down briefly at Lily sleeping against him before continuing. My niece had surgery there. I stayed overnight with my sister. His expression softened slightly. Around 3 in the morning, I walked past the pediatric waiting area and saw a woman sitting alone on the floor beside a sleeping little girl because all the chairs were full. Claire's breath caught suddenly. Ethan continued quietly. You were trying to keep Lily asleep while filling out insurance paperwork at the same time. Claire stared at him, stunned. You remember that? I remember you looked exhausted, Ethan said softly. But every time your daughter woke up crying, you smiled at her like nothing else in the world mattered. Claire felt emotion rise painfully into her throat. That hospital night had been one of the worst nights of her life. Lily had pneumonia. Claire had been terrified and completely alone. I almost walked over to help you, Ethan admitted quietly. But before I could, you carried her into the hallway and started dancing with her because she would not stop crying. Claire's eyes widened slightly. She barely remembered doing that herself. Ethan looked down toward Lily again, his expression unreadable now. I think that was the first time I realized some people survive impossible things quietly. Claire could not speak for several seconds. The city lights blurred faintly beyond the balcony glass as emotion pressed hard against her chest. Then Ethan looked back toward her again and asked softly, "Did anyone ever take care of you after that night?" Claire could not answer him right away. The question settled painfully deep inside her chest because the truth was simple and humiliating at the same time. No, nobody had really taken care of her after that night. Not after the hospital visits. Not after the divorce papers. Not after the endless exhaustion of learning how to survive alone while pretending she was handling everything perfectly. Claire looked down at her hands resting tightly in her lap as city lights shimmered beyond the balcony. "Windows. You get used to it eventually," she whispered softly. Ethan stayed quiet beside her for a moment, Lily still sleeping peacefully against his shoulder. "That is not the same thing as deserving it," he said finally. Claire closed her eyes briefly. Nobody had spoken to her with this kind of gentleness in years. Not without pity hidden underneath it. Not without expectation attached to it. Just kindness. Calm and steady and dangerously sincere. She let out a slow breath and leaned back slightly against the outdoor couch. "Tonight does not feel real," she admitted quietly. Ethan glanced toward her. "Why not?" Claire laughed softly under her breath. "Because men like you do not usually spend wedding receptions carrying around strangers' children." Lily stopped being a stranger around the time she accused me of smelling expensive. Claire smiled again despite herself. Ethan studied her carefully beneath the soft balcony lights. "There it is again." Claire frowned slightly. "What?" That smile. The warmth in his voice made her heart tighten unexpectedly. She looked away quickly toward the skyline before he could notice how much those simple words affected her. "You should not say things like that." "Why?" Claire hesitated. "Because I might start believing them. Because I forgot what it feels like when someone notices me kindly instead of critically. Because this entire night already feels too dangerous to survive with my heart intact." But instead she shook her head lightly. "Because tomorrow this all disappears." Ethan's expression changed almost instantly. More serious now. "You think this is temporary?" Claire looked at him carefully. "Is it not?" Before Ethan could answer, fireworks suddenly exploded outside above the Manhattan skyline. Bright gold light reflecting across the enormous balcony windows. The sound startled Claire slightly, while colorful sparks illuminated the night sky beyond them. Downstairs, guests in the ballroom cheered loudly as the fireworks continued blooming over the city. Lily stirred sleepily against Ethan's chest, but did not wake. Ethan glanced toward the skyline briefly before looking back at Claire again. "The bride's family does this every year," he said quietly. "Her father owns half the buildings near the harbor." Claire shook her head softly. "Of course he does." Ethan laughed under his breath. The fireworks continued bursting across the sky while warm gold light flickered softly across his face. For one impossible moment, Claire allowed herself to simply look at him. Really look at him. The calm strength in the way he held Lily protectively. The patience in his eyes every time he listened to her speak. The strange loneliness she sometimes caught hidden beneath his confidence whenever he thought nobody was watching him. It scared her how much she already wanted to know more. Ethan noticed her staring after a moment. "What?" Claire swallowed quickly and looked away. "Nothing. You are a terrible liar." "I am out of practice." Another firework burst outside, painting silver light across the balcony. Ethan shifted slightly closer, his voice softer now beneath the distant cheering downstairs. "Claire." The way he said her name felt entirely too intimate. Claire looked back at him slowly. Ethan's gray eyes held hers steadily while the city lights shimmered behind them both. "Tonight was not pretend for me." Her heartbeat stopped completely for one terrifying second. Claire stared at him speechlessly as emotion rose sharply in her chest. Dangerous. This was exactly what dangerous felt like. Because part of her believed him instantly. Ethan carefully adjusted Lily higher against his shoulder again before continuing quietly. "I know this probably sounds insane considering we met only a few hours ago." "A little," Claire whispered breathlessly. One corner of his mouth lifted faintly. "Fair." Then his expression softened again. "But I have spent years surrounded by people who perform happiness beautifully while feeling absolutely nothing." His gaze never left hers. "And tonight I met a woman who still knows how to love people honestly after every reason not to." Claire felt tears threaten unexpectedly behind her eyes. She looked away quickly before they could fall. Ethan. He reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo jacket carefully with his free hand while still holding Lily securely. For a second, Claire thought he might hand her a business card or ask for her number like normal people would. Instead, Ethan pulled out an old, folded photograph worn slightly at the edges. Claire frowned softly as he handed it to her. Confused, she unfolded it beneath the balcony lights. Her breath caught instantly. It was her. 2 years ago at Bellevue Hospital. Claire sat on the pediatric hallway floor holding a sleeping Lily against her chest while fluorescent hospital lights blurred above them. Claire looked up at Ethan in complete shock. "You kept this?" Ethan's voice remained quiet. "I never forgot you." Before Claire could process another word, voices suddenly echoed from inside the ballroom behind them as the balcony doors slid open again. "There they are." Claire turned sharply toward the sound just as camera flashes exploded across the balcony entrance. 3 photographers stood near the doorway beside several curious wedding guests staring openly at them. One photographer immediately lifted his camera again. "Mr. Calloway," he called excitedly. "Who is the woman with you tonight?"